Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into a single powerful source, looking closely at one specific rule for parents. It's Rule 5, and it states, pretty bluntly, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them.
Right. And this isn't just, about setting household rules. It's a much deeper exploration, the source argues, into human nature, why kids act the way they do, and what, effective guidance really means.
Exactly. We're going to break down why this rule is presented as so crucial. We'll also challenge some maybe common ideas about childhood innocence that the source itself pushes back on.
And we'll look at the difficult, but the text says vital role parents play in basically preparing kids for the world outside the family. Our mission here is to pull out the core insights from this text to really understand the impact on everyone when parents allow behavior they genuinely dislike.
Okay, so let's unpack the problem the source sets up right away. It gives some, pretty vivid examples of what happens when this rule gets ignored. Picture that screaming 3-year-old at the airport. The source says they're doing it voluntarily, irritating everyone.
Yeah, and the point made is stark. The parents could have stopped it. Maybe 30 seconds of carefully directed problem solving. But they didn't, and the child ends up being, quote, the object of a crowd's contempt. Not great.
Not great at all. And it connects to this idea, which I found fascinating, that not setting limits actually reduces the child's freedom.
Exactly. That example of the 2-year-old. His parents had to constantly micromanage him during a visit because he'd just cause chaos otherwise. By not teaching him basic boundaries, they essentially took away every opportunity to engage in independent action.
Right. The source calls it too much chaos breeding too much order. A real paradox.
It is, and you get these other images too, like those dinner parties just ruined by, 4- and 5-year-olds?
Yeah, exhibiting juvenile tyranny is the phrase used,
Yeah.
while the parents are just stuck, embarrassed, unable to step in.
And there's that really telling story. The child hitting the source's daughter with a truck, then later pushing his sister over a glass table, and the mother's reaction, comforting him both times.
In hushed tones, even patting him in a way the source saw as clear approval.
Yeah.
Something.
It is. And the source links this indulgence, sometimes especially with sons, to maybe an unconscious desire to create a little God Emperor of the universe. Contrasting it with how some mothers might push back against adult male demands, but jump up if their son yells for a sandwich while gaming.
Yeah, it even touches on evolutionary ideas about gene propagation, mentioning historical figures like Genghis Khan as sort of extreme examples of that drive.
But it's not just about sons, is it? The source is careful to show other dynamics.
No, absolutely not. That story about the 4-year-old boy allowed to go hungry by his own mother, who was a psychologist.
All right, dropping him off, saying that's okay, just dismissing it.
And the source's wife patiently feeding him, calling him a good boy when he ate.
Their reaction described is so powerful, that wide, radiant smile, following her around like a puppy, seeking that connection.
And then the biological mother's later comment, oh, supermom, described as coming from a black, murderous heart unchanged. It's heavy stuff.
It really is. But the source argues these aren't just, isolated horror stories. It brings up everybody hates arithmetic.
The daily grind, right? Those small, constant conflicts that just wear you down.
Exactly. Like fighting over bedtime, 45 minutes, every single night.
Let's do the math the source lays out there. 45 minutes a day times 7 days.
That's 315 minutes over 5 hours a week.
Which is 20 hours a month, 240 hours a year.
Yeah, the source calculates that as basically a month and a half of standard 40-hour work weeks.
Spent just fighting ineffectually and miserably with your own kid.
And that inevitably breeds resentment, right?
Right.
Suffering for both the parent and the child. It's a bad cycle.
So this really leads to the big question the source tackles. Where's the problem? Is it the child, the parent, nature, society?
Well, a lot of popular thinking, the source notes, tends to blame the adult or society. There are no bad children, only bad parents.
The source calls that idea dangerously and naively romantic.
Yeah, tracing some of it back to Rousseau, the 18th century philosopher, who maybe, ironically, idealized this pre-civilized state while abandoning his own 5 kids to orphanages.
Oof. Yeah.
So the text argues this notion of an unsullied spirit only damaged by culture just doesn't hold up to the evidence. Human beings, it states, have a capacity for evil as well as good. And that's there from early on.
It even suggests people generally improve with age, become kinder, more conscientious.
Right, pointing out that the kind of intense bullying at the schoolyard is actually pretty rare in adult life. Lord of the Flies is mentioned as a classic. For a reason, it touches a nerve about human nature.
And the source really challenges blaming society for all bad behavior. It brings in Jane Goodall's work.
Yeah, her discoveries from the 70s onwards, finding that chimpanzees, our closest relatives, actually engage in deliberate lethal violence against each other. Murder.
Despite her initial reluctance to even believe it, thinking maybe her presence caused it.
Right, but it turned out to be, well, not uncommon. The source describes chimp warfare as having almost unimaginable brutality.
Chimps are incredibly strong, and they can literally tear each other to pieces, and they do.
And the point is, you can't blame that on human societies and their complex technologies. This capacity exists outside of human culture.
The text quotes some of Goodall's horrific observations directly.
Yeah,
It's quite graphic. Things like drinking blood from a victim.
it's grim. And the source also mentions human examples, like accounts from the rape of Nanking or Unit 731, as evidence of human malevolence that goes beyond simple societal explanations.
And it pushes back on the noble savage idea regarding hunter-gatherer societies, too.
Yeah, arguing that despite communal living, data suggests they were often far more murderous than complex urban societies. It compares homicide rates.
Showing rates sometimes hundreds of times higher in some groups before state control compared to, say, the modern UK.
Exactly. So, what's the takeaway for parenting, according to the source?
Well, because kids, like all humans, are not only good, you can't just leave them alone to bloom into perfection.
Right. Even dogs need socialization, the text points out. Kids are way more complex.
So they're much more likely to go complexly astray if they are not trained, disciplined, and properly encouraged.
Attributing all the bad stuff purely to social structures, the source says that's wrong enough to be virtually backward.
Socialization, then, isn't about crushing goodness. It's about preventing harm and actually fostering good. Kids must be shaped and informed or they cannot thrive. They need that attention to become functional social beings.
And this shifts us to the parent's role and the damage that can be done by not acting, damage by omission.
Yeah, that lack of incisive attention. Parents who are afraid of conflict, who no longer dare to correct their kids, leaving them adrift.
The text describes these kids as potentially becoming doughy and unfocused and vague.
Leaden and dull instead of golden and bright, like uncarved blocks, just sort of waiting.
And why should you care about that description? Because these are often the kids who get ignored by their peers. They're not fun to play with.
Adults react similarly, the source observes from experience around a daycare.
Yeah, describing these poorly socialized kids, clinging, lacking proper distance, just desperate for adult attention in a way that's off-putting.
The source admits feeling annoyance, even disgust sometimes, and this internal warning signal about the comparative danger, the likelihood of inappropriate dependence, the drain on resources.
And it argues many modern parents are basically paralyzed by the fear that they will no longer be liked or even loved if they discipline,
They want friendship above respect.
which the source says flatly is not good. A child has lots of friends, but only a couple of parents, maybe just one.
Parents are more, not less than friends. And friends, well, friends have very little authority to correct bad behavior.
So, the text stresses, parents need to learn to tolerate that momentary anger, maybe even hatred, that comes after necessary correction. Parents are positioned as the arbiters of society for the child. They teach the rules of engagement so others can interact with the child meaningfully.
Discipline, then, is framed as responsibility, a careful combination of mercy and long-term judgment.
And crucially, it takes effort. The idea that any constraint is bad, that's called lazy, cruel, and inexcusable self-deception.
It also pushes back on some common objections, right?
Yeah.
Like rules stifle creativity.
Yeah, the source says the science actually shows the opposite limitations often facilitate creative achievement.
And the idea that kids make good choices about sleep or food.
Not really, the source argues. They might fight sleep or live on junk food if it gets them attention or power.
And kids will provoke adults. It's compared to juvenile chimps hassling the adults.
Right. It's described as exploring, testing boundaries, finding the limits of what might otherwise feel like terrifyingly unstructured freedom.
Discovering those limits actually provides security.
The source gives that striking hypothetical. The kid on the playground stepping on his daughter's hands, staring him down.
And the source's internal reaction. Wanting to, throw the kid. He didn't, obviously. Took his daughter away.
But he reflects that intervening more directly might have actually been better for the other child in the long run.
Which leads to the question, why does a toddler hit their mother?
The source calls that question stupid, unacceptably naive, The answer presented is blunt, to dominate her, to see if he can get away with it.
Violence is presented almost as the default. Peace is the achievement.
Exactly. Violence is innate. It facilitates desire. And statistically, 2-year-olds are the most violent people.
Hitting, biting, kicking, stealing. It's exploration, outrage, impulse, and fundamentally testing limits.
Like blind people searching for a wall, they have to push to find out where the wall is.
So consistent correction is what shows them the wall. Without it, they just keep pushing.
Correction helps them learn that, say, hitting is suboptimal for getting what they want socially. Without that feedback, they don't develop self-control.
The source shares that personal story about his own son being ornery as a toddler, fighting the spoon at 9 months.
Leading to that whole negative cycle. Not eating, not sleeping, crying, grumpy parents.
And his intervention. Prepared for war, high noon, patience, persistence, even that annoying little poke.
An hour-long struggle, ending with the son eating, collapsing on his chest, napping together.
And the punchline. The son liked me a lot better when he woke up than he had before he was disciplined.
Then there's the babysitting story. The 2-year-old who wouldn't sleep, whose parents used Elmo videos as a reward.
The source refused that, pointing out that crying isn't always sadness or hurt. Often it's anger.
Yeah, distinguishing anger crying from fear or sadness crying.
His method was firm, patient, laying the child down repeatedly. Lie down, monster. Hand on the back.
Took multiple tries, but the kid gave in, slept, stayed asleep.
And when the dad asked how it went, good. He slept the whole time. No detailed explanation.
Yeah, justifying it later as don't cast pearls before swine, and noting the parents' Elmo method was also, in its own way, harsh.
Okay, so this leads into the whole discipline and punish discussion, which makes modern parents nervous.
Rightly so in some ways. Images of prisons, tyrants, caution is needed. But the source argues both discipline and punishment are ultimately necessary. You can't escape using them, whether consciously or not, well or badly.
It acknowledges reward-based approaches, like Skinner's work. Reinforcing good behavior works.
Absolutely. Watching for approximations of what you want, reinforcing immediately, works for toddlers, setting tables, works for teenagers when you actually listen to them.
But the source notes even Skinner found purely positive reinforcement difficult. Lots of waiting.
More importantly, the text argues negative emotions are essential for learning. Pain, fear, shame, disgust, they protect us.
Pain is more potent than pleasure. Anxiety more than hope. These feelings help us survive.
And since kids can't fully grasp dangers or handle constant rejection from others yet,
the goal isn't to shield them completely from fear or pain.
No, it's how to maximize their learning so that useful knowledge may be gained with minimal cost.
Which brings us to the Sleeping Beauty analogy.
Yeah, the king and queen try to protect her by excluding Maleficent nature's negative side.
But removing negativity doesn't protect her. It makes her weak, naive.
So the curse, the pricked finger, maybe symbolizing emergence into adulthood, leads to unconsciousness, a retreat from adult life's terrors.
The point being, overprotected kids can crumble at the first real encounter with failure or actual malice.
Like the child never taught to share, parents avoid the conflict now.
But later, the child tries to make friends, fails, gets rejected. Other parents don't invite them back.
Leading to loneliness, anxiety, depression, resentment, that turning from life, that's like wanting unconsciousness.
So parents avoiding conflict now aren't saving their kids from pain.
Not at all. They're just ensuring the judgmental and uncaring broader social world will mete out conflict and punishment far greater later.
The message is stark. You discipline your child, or society will. And avoiding that responsibility isn't love.
And it directly tackles that idea that adult rules are just arbitrary, maybe even adultism.
Why should a kid follow rules?
Because they're dependent on adults. It's objectively better for them to learn behavior that invites care and positive attention, which they need to develop. They need to learn to comply gracefully with the expectations of civil society, not to become conformist robots, but because that's how they succeed.
Parents should reward what leads to success and discourage, through threat or punishment if necessary, what leads to misery.
And there's a critical window for this, right? The socialization by age 4 is key.
Yeah, the source warns that after that, making friends becomes forever difficult. Rejected kids can fall behind developmentally.
Friendless child often becomes lonely, antisocial, or depressed teenager and adult. We need that social community for our sanity, to keep us on track.
And the rules in a functioning society aren't arbitrary, the source argues. They aim for mutual benefit. Even chimp groups show non-arbitrary hierarchies based on competence.
Exactly. Poorly socialized kids just have harder lives. The issue isn't whether to discipline, but how to do it consciously and thoughtfully.
So the source lays out 5 principles for this.
Right. First, limit the rules. Don't have too many. Focus on the important stuff.
Like no biting, kicking, hitting unless defending yourself. No bullying. Eat properly, share, pay attention, sleep okay, take care of stuff, be good company. Basically, act so people are glad you're there.
Second, use minimum necessary force. Start small. A glare, a command, maybe a gentle physical correction, escalating only as needed. Useful in public when kids test you.
Third, parents should ideally come in pairs. It's hard work. A partner can help you stay balanced, observe, step in, prevent overreaction when you're tired or stressed.
It acknowledges single parents face huge challenges, but does question if all family structures are equally optimal for this demanding job.
Fourth, parents need to understand their own dark side, their capacity for harshness, revenge.
Yeah, nobody means to be a bad parent, but we all have that potential. Adults can't stand being dominated by a child forever. Revenge will come, the source says bluntly.
Unchecked bad behavior breeds parental resentment. That's the real punishment. Subtle withdrawal, constant conflict.
So, self-aware parents plan discipline to avoid acting out of hatred. It warns about toxic families.
And fifth, parents have a duty to act as merciful proxies for the real world. This is presented as the top duty.
More important than ensuring happiness, fostering creativity, boosting self-esteem, initially anyway. The main job, make kids socially desirable.
Because that's what provides opportunity, self-regard, and security. Individual identity comes later, after social competence is established.
Now, the source doesn't shy away from physical discipline objections.
No, it directly challenges the idea that there is no excuse.
Arguing that sometimes immediate stopping is critical, fork in the socket, running into traffic laughing.
In those moments, whatever stops it fastest, within reason, might be justified, because the alternative is potentially fatal.
And this applies socially, too. The unsocialized 4-year-old faces harsher social penalties later. The no excuse idea ignores this, fostering the delusion that teenage devils magically emerge from once innocent little child angels.
Ignoring bad behavior doesn't make it go away.
It also argues that no only works because it's ultimately backed by some kind of consequence, some power. Otherwise, it's meaningless.
The only time no ever means no in the absence of violence is when it is uttered by one civilized person to another. Strong words.
And the claim, hitting teaches hitting, called wrong, too simple.
Yeah, arguing hitting isn't specific enough. Context, magnitude matter. A light flick after hitting a baby isn't the same as abuse.
It argues that flick might help the child connect action and consequence, protect the sibling. Avoiding that allows bullying, rejecting discipline out of niceness.
Leads to the warning. Every gingerbread house has a witch inside it that devours children, meaning niceness can hide danger.
So the conclusion is, discipline happens, effectively or ineffectively. Nature and society will punish errors harshly if parents don't provide correction first.
It gives practical hints. Timeout works if the child is welcomed back when calm. The rule being, come be with us as soon as you can behave.
If they run, physical restraint might be needed. For serious defiance, a swat across the backside can indicate requisite seriousness. Sometimes more is needed. Not thinking it through is irresponsible, the source maintains.
Okay, so after all that, where does it leave us? What's the goal?
The goal, according to the source, is clear. Parents acting as proxies for the real world, merciful proxies, caring proxies, but proxies nonetheless.
And the primary duty is to make children socially desirable.
Right. That's what gives kids real opportunity, self-regard, and security. Not forced happiness or inflated self-esteem. Social skills come first.
Individuality develops on top of that foundation.
The ideal outcome, maybe by age 3 or 4, a child who's polite, engaging, confident, but not a pushover.
Someone other kids want to play with, adults appreciate, and want to help.
They get welcomed, competed for. Adults introduce them to things. This does more for their future individuality, the source argues, than parents avoiding conflict now.
So parents need to be honest, maybe with each other or a friend, about what behaviors they genuinely dislike in their kids.
Yeah, don't be afraid of those feelings. They're a guide. Check yourself for pettiness, sure, but then make your children behave. Take responsibility. Apologize for your mistakes. Learn.
And the reason? You love them.
Yeah.
If you dislike their actions.
Think what an effect they will have on other people who care much less about them than you.
Others will punish them by ignoring them or through direct conflict.
It's better for parents to gently but clearly teach what's acceptable and what's not so they can navigate the world outside.
The result: a child who pays attention, plays well, isn't annoying, is trustworthy.
They thrive. They find friends, teachers like them, adults guide them. They can handle what can be a cold, unforgiving, and a hostile world.
Clear rules, the source says, make secure kids, calm parents. Proper discipline balances mercy and justice.
It helps the child, the family, society maintain the order that protects us from chaos. These are the greater gifts parents can offer.
Wow, that was quite a deep dive into just one rule.
Yeah, the source material is really uncompromising on this. The discomfort now is far less than the pain later if kids aren't prepared.
Avoiding conflict today just pushes it down the road and makes it bigger.
Exactly. It doesn't eliminate suffering, just defers and magnifies it.
It definitely makes you think about those moments, where maybe we choose the path of least resistance, prioritize immediate peace over long-term well-being.
And perhaps it leaves you, the listener, with a question to chew on. Reflecting on this, what specific behavior are you currently putting up with in your child? Something that genuinely makes you dislike them in that moment.
And what's the real long-term cost, not just for them, but for you too, if that behavior isn't addressed with both compassion and necessary firmness?
Something to mull over.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.